So what I want to talk with you guys, in the second day of the first training, we spent a fair amount of time laying out the river of cruelty. And I want you to know that when we created the river of cruelty map, I was so excited because I'd finally invented or helped to create. It wasn't just me, but Janae and I had worked on these boxes and trying to figure this stuff out. And it was like, oh yes, an intellectual way to look at an emotional process, and this will be great. So now we can finally talk about this without all the emotional energy, and it'll just be a nice intellectual conversation about how cruelty passes. And we were all excited to do this, and we did it for the Department of Corrections, a bunch of our friends in Kansas Department of Corrections. And we're not like two boxes into this thing when everybody's crying. And I'm like telling them, no, no, this is not emotional. Just talk. No, this is all. It was not what I expected. But what happened was the river of cruelty takes people into their own story. And if we're not really careful about that, it catches people by surprise. They don't see it coming, and suddenly they're wading into a middle of their story that they don't commonly think about, and they certainly don't commonly share with others. And so there's a process to teaching and presenting this. And I would argue that it's a process of any time we're walking toward vulnerability, that if we just jump into vulnerability or expect vulnerability, people just dig their heels in and we're at a standoff. And so we have to be very thoughtful and gentle and just cautious about how we have this conversation. And so I start the conversation of the river of cruelty about talking about where it comes from. And so I talk about Alice Miller and her drama of the gifted child. And the cool thing that Alice said about that we were all born perfect. And commonly I'll draw a star on the board that just represents perfection. And she wasn't like, oh, we're these perfect, specimens of humanity or whatever. That's not what she's saying. The way I understand her is that she's saying we were all born with the ability to express ourselves and just simply let people know we had needs. When we're very young, we can cry when we're hungry. We can cry when we're cold. We can cry when we're sick. We can cry when we're tired. We can, and we don't have this ability to take care of those needs ourselves. And so we have to find a way to communicate mad, sad, glad, and afraid and the personal needs that we have so that somebody can do this. I can tell you that if I had been able at 4 months old to go to the fridge and make a ham and cheese sandwich, it would have made my mom's life a lot easier, right? But I couldn't do that. So she had to tend to my needs for me until I could do it for myself. And so I had to be able to express what I was feeling, what my needs were. But I can tell you as I got older, and not much older, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, I started learning that sometimes when I'm expressing my needs or my feelings, that suddenly it wasn't okay anymore. Right? That my friends, I can remember crying in first grade. I think I'd skinned my knee on the gravel playground, and I remember them calling me a crybaby. Right? I remember, you big crybaby, you big sissy, you big baby, whatever it was, and it hurt my feelings. Right? And so I'm starting to learn, oh, there's some feelings and some things that I have, that I experience, that are not okay for me to express to others at certain times. I'm not supposed to speak out loud in church. I'm not supposed to be afraid because then I'm a scaredy cat. I'm all these things. And so suddenly what Alice Miller says is that our family, our schools, our churches, our institutions, our cultures start taking our perfection away from us and start molding us into what they think we should be instead of accepting us for our perfection of being able to freely tell people what we're feeling. And I can remember that pretty clearly on the playground in elementary school. Now, just real quickly, can you guys remember times when you started feeling something and you were told that that wasn't okay? That it was like, no, don't do that here. Can you just share a couple of those just real quickly?
I remember in kindergarten, my mom or my brother was born, and just taking all of mom's time. And I remember telling my mom that I was really sad that Jimmy was born, and she just freaked out. And
What does freaked out mean? What do you,
she yelled and said that I should never say anything like that ever again.
yeah.
That's very disrespectful.
So
And,
lesson learned, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah. Thanks, Carmen. Anybody else just have an example?
I remember in one fell swoop, we were at the beach. I was 3, maybe 3, and I wanted to go into the water, and Dad said, let's go. And I didn't want to go that deep. And he was up to his chest, and the waves were getting in my face, and I was crying and scared, and I was absolutely told that it's stupid, that I shouldn't be scared. I don't know what the exact words were, but I was bad for being scared. I was probably yelling and screaming and crying. In fact, I know I was. And then at the exact same, finally got back on the beach and ran over to Mom, and then I started exploring, and I wandered over to a fella. I can tell you exactly what he looks like. It was a stranger, and he looked different. He was wearing different clothes. He was hairy and that sort of thing. And being afraid of that. And then Mom and Dad taking me over there to talk to him. And that was weird. And so, yeah, I'm not supposed to be afraid of people who look funny to me.
And so suddenly we're learning all this stuff, right? About we're supposed to hide certain feelings that we have, or we're not supposed to feel that way, even though we are feeling that way. And suddenly the world is getting really complicated. And so we have all these forces, and Alice Miller talks about this, that that our perfection is taken away from us because we're being, separated out, and certain parts of ourselves we're being informed are not okay or not acceptable, and we need to be nice, we need to share, we need to be, this is what's happening to us, and it has an impact. So if we understand that piece of it, that it's kind of natural that our perfection, our ability to just express ourselves and share with people what's happening to us is somehow being taken away from us, it's really problematic in the river of cruelty. Now, if I step out of this presentation about the river of cruelty, I'm imagining that I'm talking to a group of people who, under no circumstances, want to share what happened to them and what their feelings were about what happened to them. And so I have to be able to, first of all, be sensitive to, I'm talking to people who are afraid. And I know that. And so how do I help them to take little steps and to kind of check out whether their fear is reasonable or not, or necessary at the moment? Do they need to be controlled by that fear, or can they somehow take steps to kind of go through that? And so I'm going to be very cautious about starting with an external focused conversation. I am not going to be too abrupt. I'm not going to throw them into vulnerability right away. I'm just going to say, great, so let's take a look at how people can lose their perfection, right? What are the cruel experiences that people can experience, that other people, that other kids, what is it that some kids can experience that would be cruel? I'm keeping it so far away from their personal story at this point in time because I know where I'm going, but they're not ready to go there yet. So tell me, let's make a list of all the things that you can think of that kids might experience growing up that would be cruel, that would help them to lose their perfection. And then we just build a list. Right? We're just brainstorming a list, and we're just building all this stuff, and people are just thinking about what other kids experience. And once we get this list built up, I'm going to take the next step in here. I'm going to say, hey, can you take a look at that list and just identify the things that you experience? That's a big leap. We've just taken a leap from external focus to an internal focused conversation. It sounds like it's just a question, but it is not just a question. It is inviting people to go explore their sacred space. And we want to treat it that way, that this is kind of, but I'm not going to make a big deal about it. And while people are counting and looking at the list, I might be up there checking off the things that I went through, right? I mean, yeah, I had this happen to me and this happened to me. And I'm kind of working to normalize that this stuff happens to us, right? And so right off the bat, we've gone from an Alice Miller, very safe external conversation to, oh, and we lose our perfection and it's common. We just shared a couple stories about how our emotions aren't okay. Then we just externally focus, build a list, and then we ask people to put check marks on the board, right? Can you identify what happened to you? And when we ask that question, I know as a presenter that many people in the room are now emotionally activated. They're going back into their own story, right? Which brings up the next question, which is the next box, right? Now people are emotionally activated and we can say, so now when this happens to kids, when this happened to you, what was the feeling that was occurring to you? What activated in you the moment this cruelty was happening? And people will tell you, broken, small, worthless, helpless, hopeless, pathetic, sad, afraid, on and on and on. But now they're speaking most often for themselves. And they're talking to you in a little bit of a distance about very private emotions that they don't talk about with people. Oh, I felt broken. Oh, I felt small. I felt dirty. I felt worthless. And if you remember that when they're saying that, they're talking about a 4-year-old feeling dirty, a 6-year-old feeling helpless, right? They're talking about people in very early ages of life feeling really difficult emotional experiences for people to survive. And so they're already sharing with you way more than what they would normally share in everyday conversation when they're in the coffee shop having their morning coffee, right? And so we just know they're there and we're just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. Because now we're into this world and we know in the world of cruelty, we know in Batter's intervention that everybody feels worthless. Everybody feels small. Everybody feels stupid at some point in time in their life. We just can't get away from those feelings. And people in emotionally kind of healthy, emotionally intelligent families understand, oh, of course you would feel stupid and helpless in that. Of course you would. Let me come here. Let me comfort you. But that's not what happens in most families. So a 4 or 6 or an 8-year-old child has to come up with a strategy of how they're going to survive feeling worthless, helpless, small, and broken. And so when you introduce the next box, the defense systems box, what you're doing is asking people, how did you survive this? What did you do? What was your strategy when no one was there to help you normalize, validate, and grow to accept that these are just human experiences that we have? What did you have to do? And now people are telling you, this is how I defend. This is how I protect myself from feeling the things in the third box, the defense box. And so we're just listening to how do you defend it? And I know, and I will put up, this is what I would do. I can remember my first girlfriend breaking up with me because I was conceited, right? I can remember trying to be the greatest athlete in the world so that I would never be second best because I thought second best was worse, was horrible. And so I had all these defense systems, arrogance. I was a braggart. I was very selfish. I was all about, I told everybody how great I was because I didn't want anyone to know how stupid I was. And now I'm letting people know this is what I do to hide from these feelings. When they talk about their defense systems, they're telling you what their adverse feelings are. That's the doorway. When someone comes in really angry, they're telling you they're afraid and sad. right? When someone is really wanting to tell you how great they are, they're telling you how afraid they are of being nothing. They're letting you know that. And but now they're taking and just going through, what are your defense systems? Right? And so they've just told you their psychological roadmap. They've just told you, I was horribly abused when I was growing up. I was mistreated and I felt like I was unloved and small. And this is how I survived that. That's a powerful story if we stop there. But the next step of that is to go, well, how's that working for you? Right? It's kind of like, well, I'm sure, because defense systems do that. They help us to not feel what we don't want to feel, but they have these consequences to them. Right? And for me, the consequences were I didn't have very many friends. People didn't like a braggart who was always had to win and thought they were better than everybody else. And, here I was trying to keep people from seeing that I was stupid and incapable and couldn't do my homework, and I probably didn't know very much. I couldn't read a book very well. And so I was trying to keep people from seeing how stupid I felt. And what I was doing was showing people how stupid I felt, right? Because they just said, no, thank you, Steve. We don't want anything to do with you, right? But that wasn't my goal. My goal was to try to get acceptance and hide the things that I thought would cost me acceptance. And what my defense systems did was cost me acceptance. It created the very thing that I was afraid of. But I didn't know that. That's right. Getting belonging, Rebecca, was what I was after, and I was getting disconnection instead. So I want you to know that when you're walking through this, the cruelty you experience, the adverse feelings and the defense systems, you're walking into people's sacred ground and they don't see it coming. And that's scary. And so we have to be very thoughtful, very patient, and normalize it with our own story before we ask people to put check marks on the board, to identify what their defense systems were. What were there? What are unintended consequences generally? Oh, money, criminal behavior, broken relationships, loss of dreams, on and on. Yes. How many of those are yours? All right. We always start external and general speaking and then personalize it later. And then we get to the beliefs and attitudes. And the beliefs and attitudes are kind of the absolutes, right? The absolutes of, well, I'm stupid and worthless and no one could love me if they really could see me. I believe that to be a fact. And the idea that it may not be a fact is a little bit of a challenge for me to get my brain around that, because how can people love me if they know I'm stupid and worthless? Right? Which is the value of the golden shadow message, because suddenly there's evidence that, hey, maybe I'm not, and I've got evidence to consider that. And so we look at all those things, and when we're presenting this stuff in our classes, the next thing we do is we're still pursuing vulnerability. We're still pursuing that internal focused conversation. So we would ask people to build their own river maps and bring it into class and share their story with the room the next week, right? So that everybody would come and share their river maps. And that's a really risky feeling. When, as we started out this morning saying, holy cow, I finally learned that if I'm vulnerable, I won't die. That's a big deal. And people believe that. And so when they're sharing, this is what happened to me, and this is what it felt like, and this is how I survived that, that's an amazing story that many times no one's ever heard out of their mouths before. And it's such a gift when people have the opportunity to give that, share that in my presence. It's like, wow, we're really in the sacred ground of the human being at this time. And so I want you to understand that we don't have the right to the vulnerability. We know, using the conflict tree or using the funnel or using the shadow process, we can access people's, hidden stories, but we don't have the right to it. And if we can lead by example and share our own story and be cautious and gentle and validating and kind, people will share amazingly vulnerable things with us. I was just in a phone call yesterday where one of the facilitators was talking about, the vulnerability that happened in his room. And he says it's like we wanted to stay there for hours because these were stories that had never been told, right? In the history of humanity, these individual stories had never been told. And those are the stories that you'll get. But I want you to know that people are afraid of their own stories, and they will tell you that there's a process and a caution and a healthy respect that has to occur while we're walking people into a place that they don't even see coming, right? Suddenly they're going to be connected to stories that they had worked very hard to forget. And so each one of those boxes, making a list, sharing a little bit about myself, and then asking, how about you? Which one of these things do you connect with? Next box, self-disclose, share a little bit about that, and then ask, how about you? What was your strategy? And then accepting whatever people are willing to offer or not as we go down the road. Now, that's really what I wanted to say about the river of cruelty. I thought, I was naive. I thought that the 5 or 6 boxes was going to be a very cognitive experience, that it would just be, and holy cow, was I embarrassingly surprised that people got lost in their own stories, which is where they should be, right? Not where I thought that they were going to go. And so I want to stop there, and let's have a little bit of a conversation about what are you thinking about when you listen to this, and if there's questions or comments, and then we'll just take a break and go to lunch. What are you guys thinking?
I just want to say that this is, again, it is very sacred ground. And this part of the 2 days for me was what I think left me speechless for about 4 days.
Can you talk a little bit about what happened to you? Why did it leave you speechless?
My face was hot and I was so confused and I couldn't figure out what I was feeling. And then I had to go back into the origin. And in the origin is fear and sadness. And I've known my whole life that those origins have created the destruction that I've given to other people and to myself. And the only way I could process my anger for the origin story that led to the second origin story with the partner who was my soulmate, that to get rid of the violence and the abuse, I had to give up my soulmate.
Right.
Is she ready to talk to me, Aiden? Okay. So anyways, I need to go talk to his therapist. She's on the phone. So I'm so glad we're recording this, but anyways, so the emotional load that starts showing up right there is incredible for people. So.
Right. Rebecca, thank you. Anybody else have thoughts on that or comments? Because really what I want you to be hearing is there's a strategy, there's a specific intentionality about how we do what we do. It's not a random accident. And that's what I want you to be thinking about when you're training, is that if you're pursuing vulnerability and introspection in your audience, there's a process to be able to get there. And there may be a better process, but over the years, this is what we've found helps to create the safety so that people can maybe consider taking that risk.
I think it's really clean. I think it's really clear. I think it's really compassionate. I think that because when I experienced it and you walked us through it and you just kind of felt like we're just gonna do this. It's not really a thing. I mean, it's a thing, but
Right.
and it felt comfortable because of the intentionality that you did with we're going to talk about other places and other things first and slowly get closer. And then, and I saw that, but to have you lay it out pretty cleanly right here allows me to look at it and to continue to rehearse it in my head of how I can get that flavor on that as well.
Thanks, Ginger.
This is not in terms of facilitating, but just me personally. I remember, Steve, when you talked about when it was Holly and you, I think that led it through when Ginger and I were there. Just that the adverse feelings and how if we could actually like sit in them, and accept them, like we could stop some of this. And I just remember thinking just that really took my breath away, just because I've worked so hard to stuff them down or to try to stop dealing with them. And so for me, like that painful shift idea, or even being able to sit in them, just sit in them, and accept them, I think is just so powerful.
And what a simple concept that as a 60-year-old man, the idea that human beings should be able to be comfortable with their own emotional self.
Yeah.
I should have learned that when I was 5.
Right.
That is a fundamental law of humanity, that we have emotions and we should learn how to manage them. And I didn't even get to start considering that until I was in my 30s. It's crazy. And Carmen, I appreciate you saying that.
Is it at the end of this where you also said, or is it somewhere else where you, now we start to begin to either live out to prove it right or prove it wrong?
That's our shadow message. Right? Once we get our shadow message, like I'm stupid and worthless, I either try to go prove it to everybody and in spades, here I am, let me show you how stupid and worthless I can be, which I certainly did. Or we might prove it to not be true by becoming a straight A student and, president of the student body and whatever, just overachieving, which I certainly did not do. But some people do that. But both ways, our shadow message is in control of ourselves, right? And so in our curriculum, we start with the ACEs questionnaire. Just a simple introduction into cruelty and how it impacts us over the lifespan. And then the next thing, right after the ACEs questionnaire, we spend a few weeks on the River of Cruelty map and how did it play out in my own life. And then the shadow message is a couple of sections after that, followed by the golden shadow, and we do it that way. The one thing I want to say, and then I'll shut off the recording. All this stuff is invisible. People can't see it. I never saw it. I didn't understand my shadow message. I didn't know it was there, although I certainly knew on some level that I felt stupid and worthless. I knew that I experienced cruelty, but I just thought, well, that's because I was stupid and worthless. It wasn't because that was something that people were doing to me. And I've been reading the book about Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Have you guys read that book?
No.
My gosh, I have a whole new perspective on this, because I was talking with Dorothy the other day about it's like we're talking about this invisible stuff that's right there in front of us, and we live our lives not even knowing it's there. And Jonathan Livingston Seagull found out that he could go and fly out over the ocean and do barrel rolls and fly at super fast speeds that no other seagull thought was possible, because they lived in what they had learned, right? And so they ostracized Jonathan Livingston Seagull. They thought that, there must be something wrong with him. He's lost his mind. But in the book, I had forgotten that Jonathan Livingston Seagull continues to meet other seagulls who are more advanced and more aware and more capable and can do other things. And it's like, oh, this kind of makes sense. once I learned that this shadow message is a thing and I can see it, it just opens up so much more I have to learn about me. And I'm convinced at this point it's a never-ending journey. And I think I'm on like level 2, and Jonathan Livingston Seagull was on like 7 or 8 or whatever he was at. But the more I learn, the more there is to learn. And that's I think what Alice Miller was saying. She said, we were born with this understanding, and then we spend the rest of our life trying to get it back. And that's sad. Because if I didn't have to give this stuff up, if you could have just been born perfect and just go from there, what do you think this world would look like today? But instead, we have to go through this process of trying to find perfection again. And it's a long journey.
I think something this has helped me identify, and I'm just kind of realizing this in this moment, I think, is the identification of the shadow message still felt kind of external to me. I mean, like, okay, so somebody told me that and that's what I believe, and I try to prove that true, or I try to prove that false throughout my life. But then identifying that came from a cruelty, and then all of this fallout from there. And so I think one thing I think this is what I wrote down I wanted to talk about, was how do you go through the painful shift to the acceptance? I think what I'm realizing now that I've done this process twice is that, man, do I really live out that shadow message and spend a lot of time and energy. But lately I've been able to stop myself and say, whoa, Katie, like that, you are feeling this right now, and you have a choice to run to that defense or not. And honestly, yesterday I didn't do that. So I got on that Zoom call I was frustrated. I'd spent a long time, doing really things that just kind of eat at my brain. And then I jumped on that Zoom call, and right before that had happened, Carmen and I were having a back and forth. My daughter's pissed because I'm trying to brush her hair and it's not going well. Carmen and I were having this back and forth text message conversation that was frustrating me to no end, because I could not figure out what she freaking wanted from me. And I knew it wasn't her fault, but I was like, God, I don't know what she's talking about. And then I get on the Zoom call, and immediately my internet starts cutting out, and Ginger commented on it. And then immediately she asked me if I was okay. And I went full into shut down, done, don't fucking talk to me. And then the problem with that was I knew it was happening, and every single person on that Zoom call knew it was happening, and they called it out, and I had to immediately retreat and accept where I was at and say, I'm not okay right now. And I'm frustrated and I'm done. But like that process, I think that's the first time I've realized the acceptance spot of that, to say, whoa, I'm separating myself on purpose. And why the answer to that was to sit on a pointless Zoom call for the next 2 hours. Because what I would have typically done is said, F this, I'm going somewhere else. And how easy that is to do in this world now.
Mm-hmm. Wow,
I could have just shut my computer lid and said, oh, my internet, that connection, and left. I mean, right? And so I think that I can see it playing out now in a way I couldn't see the first couple of times.
And your ability to be able to just talk about your experience in that experience is very powerful. It's a high level of introspection. Other people have a harder time being able to talk about what they were. They more want to talk about what the internet or what the people or what them. They want to keep it external. It's a skill to be able to learn how to be balanced in the internal, external. And so when you start looking back and reflective about what was happening to you, that's an internal focused conversation. And that's very powerful. And I love listening to you process that. Katie, thanks. Tish, I'm worried about these guys running out of energy from the morning. Is there anything else we should say about that before we take a break for a while?
Yeah, just one quick thing I wanted to add to that. Katie, I love what you're talking about, because really you're talking about emotional blindness. right? And as long as we're emotionally blind, we can't be emotionally accepting. It's, you know, you're one of the other places. And that there's layers to that, because whatever you recognize now, you'll start being aware of. But there's other things you're still emotionally blind to. There's things that, right? And as we keep, that's the Pandora's box. And there's more work to be done. And you can keep going in and you can keep going after new things. And so it is that Jonathan Livingston Seagull, the whole deal, that there's more to keep pursuing as we continue to master what we're doing. And so you guys have been brilliant this morning.
Yeah. And it's not about us being better than the people who are still on the road before us, right? It's really about what's out in front of us. And what the heck do I not know? And how am I emotionally blind? And how do I peel back the layers even further? Because the more we do that, the more we might be able to get pieces of our perfection back. I'm going to stop the recording here, and thank you guys for listening to that.